The world is complex, the Bible is complex. Human existence is a tangled ball of experience, perception, and understanding. Ravel is a puzzling word, denoting both a tangling and untangling. This podcast attempts to hold honest conversations in good faith. Some ideas expressed in this podcast will be challenging. Others will be obvious. When a PhD in biblical interpretation and a habitually podcasting man-child discuss matters of society, scripture, and scandal, you get Ravel.
Hey everybody, you are listening to Ravel, and it's me, your best buddy Basil. And with me, as always, he's the Finch fanatic, the totally tubular tortoise. He's the intelligently designed Dr. Christopher Ryan Gates.
Hello.
Hi. This is a fun one. We're doing it. More science.
Yes.
Science heavy in recent years.
If we had thought about it, we could have done a whole series ahead of time. This just kind of grew organically. It evolved into something.
Yeah, now that I'm thinking about it, especially because we said specifically that we would do a series, or that maybe we would intersperse them and still call them a series, and we just forgot about all of that, didn't we?
Yeah, well, it's because we have a series, I think, planned to begin at the beginning of the year, and we probably just didn't want to go through the hassle of doing two series.
We are series saturated, folks.
Yeah,
that's right. We're just giving you a break from the series saturation. Well, regardless, this is still a really fun one, Chris. This is a special one for old Chrissy Poo, folks.
Yeah, it sure is. We have Dr. Michael Behe, who I'm on a first name basis with now, so he's just Mike to me. Yeah, he is a biochemist, which you'll hear all about, but I came across his work in I talk a little bit about it when the episode gets rolling, but in my late teens, early 20s, came across his work. He does what is essentially becomes an apologetic for God through scientific processes, and basically gives a argument for intelligent design. And he'll talk about it, that it's something that he actually just kind of came to naturally through his studies, but really brilliant guy. And if you have done any research into the topic of intelligent design, or any kind of debunking, if you will, of Darwinistic evolution, you have almost certainly come across his name before. He is one of the pioneers, came up essentially with the idea of irreducible complexity, which is kind of a stumbling block, I think, for most people who subscribe to Darwinian evolution. So he's something of a hero of mine, and it's was really cool to be able to talk with him. Have to give a shout out again to our buddy Nick Shalna over at Universe Next Door, because he came through again on this. If you guys aren't following the Universe Next Door, you need to go follow him now.
Yeah. Thank you again, Mr. Nick. Appreciate it, buddy. We need to get Nick back on. I mean, I know we sort of abused the privilege last time we had him on. We got rowdy. We were rowdy boys. But, you guys. That's why he's just a fun guy, man. I like it. So thank you, Nick Shalna, and everybody go check out the Universe Next Door in a podcast store near you. I don't know if I have much else to say. You know, it's funny. It didn't really occur to me who exactly Michael Behe was until like right before we started talking to him. You know, we had it scheduled. You mentioned it. You told me not to be late or else, and all this kind of stuff. And I'm like, yeah. And then I show up, and then I really focus in. I'm more of a sort of action figure type. I deal with the thing in front of me. I can't think too far ahead. Don't look back, baby. It's the only way. But yeah, when I actually sat down and fully comprehended that we'll be talking to the Michael Behe, it was a pleasant surprise. Of course, I think anybody in our generation, especially coming up in the church, dealing with high school biology teachers, which, folks, you'll get to hear a fun story from old Basil land about high school biology teachers in this episode. You've definitely come in contact with Michael Behe's work. I mean, he's like the guy. So very exciting, very sweet man, very smart guy, and such a good sport for dealing with me, which is wonderful.
Yeah.
All right. Anything else you want to prepare people for?
No.
Okay.
If you wanna, know who he is, just look him up on Wikipedia. You'll get a real fair, honest appraisal of him.
It's a funny joke. He's full of jokes, folks. But yeah, just Google him. I mean, it's almost silly to give away his links, but just Google him and just take it from there, folks. You know how to Google.
All right, everybody, we are here with Dr. Michael Behe. We were talking just a little bit before the show, and have to confess that he is something of a personal hero of mine. I was going through a time of something of a crisis of faith when I was in my late teens and early 20s, and was really wrestling with some of the arguments that were being put forth by evolutionary theory, and then how that kind of coalesced or clashed with my faith, and how to reconcile the two of those sorts of things, and was introduced through a series of other research to Dr. Behe's work. Mike, he says, I can call him to his work.
Ooh.
And yeah, we're on a first name basis here. And I'm just so excited to be able to sit here and talk with him today, and to have all of you out there listening. So, Mike, how you doing today?
Good, Chris. Yeah, it's nice to be with you. And I'm. All my friends call me Mike, so I'm pleased that you do too.
All right. Well, good. We're friends.
Thank you so much for making some time for us today, Dr. Michael Behe. Somebody's got to have some decorum around here, Chris. I'm sorry. His Majesty Dr. Christopher Ryan Gates. Don't worry, folks. I will keep it classy around here, even if people start getting a little familiar with the guests. But truly, Michael Behe, thank you so much for coming on the show, buddy.
Sure, absolutely. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, I was wondering if you would just go ahead. I'm quite familiar with not quite familiar. Your work is extremely broad, but I guess I'm relatively familiar with your work. But if you would just go ahead and let everybody know, just give a general sort of introduction and overview of what it is that you do, and some of your research.
Yeah, sure. I am a biochemist, and a biochemist is a guy who studies the molecular foundation of life. And so it turns out that, when you start at an organismal level and you go down to organs and tissues and stuff, and you get to the foundation, the basement, and that cells and molecules actually run the cell. And that's only been known for about 100 years or so. Interestingly, back in the day when Charles Darwin was performing his work, cells, very little was known about cells, and they were thought to be kind of little globs of jelly called protoplasm. So it's only been arguably since the 1950s when Watson and Crick discovered the structure of DNA and the structure of proteins started to be elucidated, that science started to get a firm foundation on what the basement level of life is. And when you study biochemistry, you study enormously sophisticated and elegant systems. Things that the things that actually run the cell are really astounding beyond the technology of our present day human inventions. And over the past 25 or so years, I, through kind of serendipitous happenings, I fell in with a bad crowd that was questioning evolution, Darwinian evolution, and I've written a number of books starting in 1996 explaining why I think that random evolution cannot explain the elegant structures that science has discovered at the foundation of life.
Yeah. So just to kind of sum that up for everybody, and we talked a little bit about this with Berkeley Greider when we had him on, but you're referring back to your first book, Darwin's Black Box, and that is essentially, according to Darwin, and I believe he says this, you have this in your book, in certain terms, that he believed, and from a naturalistic explanation of what he knew of the world at that time, that the smaller we got down, the simpler structures became, and that a cell that made up the human body would just be this little globule, little bit of some kind of plasma or something like that. And what we find through the advent of microscopes and the work that you do is that cells are incredibly complex. They are almost like ecosystems unto themselves. And Darwin said something to the effect, didn't he, that if a cell was not a very simple structure, that his whole theory would go out the window? Didn't he say something like that himself?
Yeah, he didn't say that about cells in particular, but he did say something like that. He said if there were any system that could not be built by numerous successive slight modifications, that his theory would break down. And he did it in a passage of in his book, The Origin of Species, in which he was talking about the eyeball, the vertebrate eye, because it was this, even back then, it was a paradigm of complexity. And in that passage, he meant to insist that if evolution could not work by many tiny steps over long periods of time, then his ideas just wouldn't work, because if things improved rapidly in big leaps, then it would look suspiciously as if something other than random processes were involved. And he was trying to show that mindless, undirected processes could account for life. And so if you got big improvements, that would indicate that something else was happening.
Yeah. And so you have essentially challenged that idea, or sought to disprove his theory through something that you have called irreducible complexity.
That's exactly. Yeah,
go ahead.
That's right. As I wrote back in my first book, that astoundingly, science has discovered that the foundation of life, the cell, is run by machines. And literally, they're machines made out of molecules. I mean, there are literally outboard motors that cells can use to swim, and there are little real molecular trucks and buses that travel along highways made out of molecules in a cell, and there are little molecular signposts that tell the trucks and buses when to stop, and there are little forklifts that help them unload their cargo into the correct compartment, and all sorts of stuff like this. It's really crazy.
Yeah,
and again,
you see in some I don't know if they're electron microscopes or whatever they are. In looking into CRISPR and things like this, you can see that they've had incredible advances in sometimes catching on video these tiny little alien structures, carrying out what seems to be a factory job on an assembly line or something. It's like, oh yeah, here's just a little protein, and he's just marching along. He looks like a little guy He was just marching along. I just did not know proteins were such hard workers. This is an incredible advancement that we've had in this.
Not only that, they whistle while they work. So it's really
they seem to.
Wait, is there something to that? Is this true?
They seem to enjoy their jobs.
Yeah. So the problem for Darwin's theory, if you look in the dictionary and you look up the word machine, it says, well, it's this assemblage of parts, and each part kind of works, does a separate task, and that they work together to perform some function. And the machines in the cell are like that. And in fact, they are what I termed irreducibly complex, which is a fancy phrase, but it stands for a simple idea. It just means the machines need all their parts to work. And if you take one away, it's not going to work. And in the book, I pointed to a simple machine from our everyday life, a mousetrap, to illustrate what the problem is. If you think of a simple mechanical mousetrap that you might buy at a hardware store, it's got a bunch of different parts. It's got a spring, a metal part that smacks against the mouse. It's got a wooden platform, and a number of other things too. And if you take any one of those away, it's broken. It doesn't work at all. And so it needs all those things to function. And the problem for Darwin is that problem that he himself noticed, that if evolution has to work by numerous successive slight modifications, how are you going to build an irreducibly complex mousetrap? By many small steps, improving it at each step of the way. If you start with, say, the wood, that's not going to catch mice. And even if you lay one of the other parts on top of the wood, that's not going to do anything. You've got to pretty much have the whole thing together before it works at all. So that kind of rules out the gradualism that Darwinism insisted upon.
Now, one of the wonderful aspects of living in the time that we do is there's this magical wonderland called the internet. And on this fancy device, which certainly could not have evolved gradually over time, I admit, there's something called Wikipedia. And people of note, like yourself, sir, get to enjoy the thrill of having strangers on the internet assemble collections of information about you, and you have no opportunity to respond or rebut the things that they say about you. So, of course, all over Wikipedia and all these different aspects, all these different topics, such as intelligent design, irreducible complexity, you show up in a lot of Wikipedia articles, my friend. You might be the closest I've ever gotten to stardom. I'm starstruck. And it is obvious that lots of this was written without giving you the ability to respond. So in the eyeball example, which I just spent some time here secretly reading while you two were having smart conversations, giving the eyeball example of irreducible complexity, the irreducible complexity case is that the eyeball is so complex that an eyeball missing one of its mousetrap parts would not be an eyeball at all. And so how do you go from no sight to sight over in almost conceivably infinite iterations of improving when you need all the pieces in the first place to even achieve sight? And it seems like the rebuttal for this is that whoever this very gracious editor on Wikipedia is makes the point, well, not all eyeballs are the same. Some are significantly worse. For instance, bat eyeballs or some fish eyeballs, they don't necessarily see shapes. They might just detect light versus be able to, see light move or see the direction from which light is coming. And they use this as an example of a case against irreducible complexity, in that there are even now some light sensing cells that they suspect would be some sort of proto eyeball, ancestor or something. Did I do? Now I know there's no way I did any worse. I know that Wikipedia could do no worse than I just did at explaining this. But is this, surely you've heard this rebuttal?
Sure.
Huh?
Absolutely. Yeah. They say, well, yeah, vertebrate eye like we've got, it's really pretty impressive. But hey, there are some invertebrates that have just a light sensitive spot, and it can detect light and it can't tell which direction the light's coming from, but hey, it could help in some circumstances. And
Right.
then if you put the light sensitive spot in just a depressed region, now light coming from one side will cast a shadow on part of the depressed region, but not the whole thing. And theoretically, the creature could tell which direction the light was coming from, and that would be an improvement. And they go on to say, if you deepen that and start to fill it with a gelatinous material,
Eye jelly.
well, you've got the beginnings of a lens, and that would improve it further.
Yeah.
What they don't tell you is that that's what I said in Darwin's Black Box. I recounted this story, and it was originally made by Charles Darwin himself in the year 1859. Now, remember, in the year 1859, cells were thought to be simple little things filled with jelly. In chemistry, people weren't sure if molecules existed or atoms. They were kind of theoretical entities. So science was primitive back then. And since Darwin's day, science has advanced tremendously. And yet these guys are using Darwin's 19th century anatomical argument about eyes. And in that section of Darwin's Black Box where I was talking about this, I said, well, what does it take to make a light sensitive spot? The starting point of this story. And it turns out that there is a slew of molecules that are needed just to make a light sensitive spot. There's a molecule called retinal, which comes in an L shape. And when a photon of light first hits that retinal, it isomerizes, it makes it change shape, and it straightens out. And that is like a switch that sets a whole chain of events in motion. It changes shape, and it forces a change in the shape of something called transducin, which is a protein which, when its shape is changed, allows it to bind to another protein, which allows it to bind to something else, which causes calcium to enter into the cell, which causes an electrical signal to be sent down the optic nerve to the brain. And in the book, I say nobody has even tried to explain this. And furthermore, if you say, well, what does it take to make a depression for the light sensitive spot to go into? There are dozens of complex molecules that are involved in cell shape and tissue shape. And none of these guys even attempts to address how such things could get together. So essentially, they are not engaging my argument, which is at the molecular level of life, which science has discovered is the foundational level. They're stuck in the 1900s at the level of gross anatomy of eyeballs. So
this is fun. This is very fun. This is why I'm glad that I can sit here on Wikipedia. Because I noticed that they did not, they give your example and then they go into about, a 6-paragraph rant explaining the eyeball thing you just did, Darwin's eyeball. But yes, I noticed there's no section for Michael Behe's rebuttal to our 200-year-old Darwin thing.
That would just spoil it.
I'm wondering, since you brought up that there was no explanation for the eye, and even the more primitive eyes than the human eye, but I was talking with my wife, which I'll just go ahead and throw a personal note in. Today is actually our wedding anniversary. And here I am doing this, but I told her who
living the dream
lined up. I scheduled this. I actually scheduled the interview today, and then in hindsight realized it was on my anniversary. It's the first time.
Is this your first major?
It's the first time I have missed an anniversary. Yes, but we did have a nice lunch today, and while we were at lunch, I said, "Dear, I will be talking to." The great Michael Behe today, and I asked. She teaches biology and chemistry, and she's just a big old nerd when it comes to science and biology. And I said, "Is there anything in particular you would like to hear Dr. Behe talk about?" And she was asking about. She said she wanted to know what was kind of the rebut to your position, and particularly as it relates to the cell, because she teaches cell structures and all of that. So she's sitting there thinking and trying to explain to me how a cell works. And she, of course, she's a believer. We're believers. So we, just believe, well, this is an incredible creation. Seems like something with an intelligent mind made it. But when it comes to evolutionary theory, and now that we do have microscopes and all of this, what is the prevailing explanation from the secular scientific world as to how a cell came to be? Because you can take a cell, and as I understand it, you can puncture the membrane of a cell and all of the component parts will leak out, and you can leave that in a petri dish in the right environment, and it will never attempt to reassemble itself. With all of the component parts there, it never will put itself back together. So if you can actually have all the parts there and it won't construct itself, what does secular science say? What is the best argument that they have right now for how all of this happens?
Well, they actually don't have an argument. The subject of the origin of the first cell, which I think that's what it would fall under, is origin of life studies. And quite frankly, nobody has a clue as to how the first cell could have come about by some undirected, unintelligent process. The best that folks are trying to do in that field is to gin up conditions where some molecules that are found in life might be synthesized by some sort of chemical process. But at best, this is getting components of cells, and the problem is not getting components. It's as you alluded to, it's getting the right arrangement and getting everything in the right order. It's if I could say, it's kind of like, let's see, trying to find conditions where pieces of wood would be made that had markings on them that resembled letters, and you fancied to use those as Scrabble pieces and to spell out, say, the works of Shakespeare, and you spent your whole life trying to see how the letter Q could be synthesized by some undirected process. Well, good for you if you eventually get it, but that's not going to explain Romeo and Juliet. Romeo and Juliet requires, an author to put things together in the right order. So it's been what? It's been 70 or so years since Stanley Miller first did the iconic experiment of having gases in a flask and putting electricity through it and seeing that some amino acids were made. And the conditions for that have now been rejected by most scientists, as they don't really simulate what people would expect to be on a very, very young Earth. But nonetheless, it's been 70 years since scientists have been conducting real live research on the question of the origin of life, and nobody still has a clue as to how such things, how even the simplest cell could be put together. They don't know how nucleic acids could be put together by an undirected process, how proteins could be put together. If you had nucleic acids and proteins, they don't know how they could get together in a confined space to reproduce. They don't. It's an utter mystery, and you can actually find scientists who will admit that it's an utter mystery. And that would be laughable if that's all there were to the story. But these same guys will insist that school children be taught that this is the best explanation for life, that it arose from inorganic, non-living chemicals by some undirected process. Essentially, students are taught in schools, especially in public schools, because that's where the orthodoxy reigns. Students are taught things that professional scientists know to be false.
Yeah.
They know that we have no clue how life could have arisen by some undirected process, but they either say directly the opposite, or they imply strongly that we're on the right track, or they simply imply that and they don't say there's any other legitimate way for a student to think about these issues. That's kind of what gets my blood boiling. Not so much that these guys think the way they do; it's that they indoctrinate students into such a view.
It is for a group of academics and individuals, and frankly, just adults, who would claim to hold umbrage against the idea of doctrinality or orthodoxy or these types of things, as most of these high school science teachers, biology teachers, or whatever would claim. I mean, my high school I had a scene. I had a scene in high school where, it was that time I was learning all about the evolution thing. And my dad was a pastor, was then, still is now. And, saw me doing my evolution homework, and we kind of were talking about it. And, his take was, Darwin's main thing was natural selection. And, that's, there's a conversation to be had about creation and natural selection and adaptation and things like this versus macroevolution. And I go, okay, well, that surely gives me a lot to think about. And what I didn't understand was in public school, high school biology, those were things for me to think about and not to speak about, because asking questions in biology class, which, look, I was not a sort of troublemaker. I like to think I had a sort of rascally charm that created a special relationship with my teachers. But
so you were a troublemaker.
I was not a troublemaker. And, I'd bring up that kind of idea like, well, the natural selection thing certainly, could be sort of built into a created system or a creationist view, but seems like kind of a jump for the macroevolution thing. And it seems like, Darwin actually spent a lot more time interested in adaptation than he was in the macroevolution. And I have never been scolded by a teacher in front of my classmates like I was scolded then. And the feeling was not that I was, I don't know, asking the wrong question, or I was, trying to play a prank or something, or light the wastebasket on fire. The attitude was that I was, it's like I got up in church and started reciting, Black Sabbath lyrics or something. I had broken the orthodoxy. Not only had I, stepped out of the accepted thought boundaries, but I had committed some sort of offense that I needed to be exorcised from some wild spirit that was causing me to question macroevolution. And it was actually a very quite a traumatic experience. Like, even just talking about it now, I feel my body starting to relive the panic that it caused. Okay. But it was interesting that the response was not one that you would expect in a teacher-student relationship. It was something much more personal for this guy.
Yeah, I think your story is not uncommon either. There's certainly a lot of teachers, who are sensitive and who know the boundaries of our knowledge and stuff, and who want children to learn and think about these things. But there's lots who think they already know, and think that the folks who question evolution, even just question the origin of life, are a bunch of yahoos, and they're determined to put them in their place. And unfortunately, right, they really can take it out and traumatize kids, and that's horrible.
And it worked. It worked. Yeah, I never spoke up about it again.
Yeah, and you see it all over. I mean, in my travels, since I got into this business, nothing makes academics freak out more than just mildly questioning, materialism. If you make the slightest suggestion, well, gee, there might be something beyond nature that has affected it, that's the third rail for an academic to touch.
Right.
And yeah, so
which is fascinating. Is fascinating in the context of thinking about public school as more of a programming of citizens institution than it is an actual educational system. And of course, we can all, without having to get into a big conversation about it, we can all sort of see the product of that kind of social programming play out outside of school, even in the real world, when scientific orthodoxy becomes the primary measurement of morality and ethics in an adult living in society.
Yeah. The thing that's interesting to me in this whole portion of the discussion here is that as we're going back to, the idea that secular science doesn't really have an answer for the origin of life. And I recall actually even Richard Dawkins, who, postulated, well, perhaps life on Earth started, by some other intelligent life, like an alien life form. The panspermia sort of idea is basically what he, proposed as an answer. And I thought that still doesn't answer the question. Then where did the alien race come from? So they don't have an answer, which actually puts them into the same category as they are accusing, Christians or anyone who's coming from sort of a religious explanation. That it is on faith, really, that we're believing what we believe about the origin of life. We are happy to concede that it is faith as Christians, but in the scientific community, I think there's this difficulty because they can't come to grips with the fact that they actually are too placing their faith in an idea. They can't see, they can't test, they can't actually prove, and while they're accusing us of being religious fanatics, you hear, responses like Basil just offered there, and like many of us have experienced ourselves, and you kind of can just sit there and look like, who's the religious fanatic in this instance here?
Well, I'd like to push back a little bit and say that, well, yes, I do think their position is based on faith, but I think that our position is based a whole lot less on faith than on evidence.
Yeah,
and that for the entire history of humanity up until 1859. Virtually everybody, religious or not, educated or not, rich or poor, man or woman, thought that life was purposely made. And the reason was not, because of any doctrine or anything, but they could see that, birds have wings, and we've got eyes that can see and ears that can hear, and look, our fingers can grasp things, and we can dance, and we have that life has this structure that allows things to roam around. We have that life, living things are built for purposes. And it turns out that we perceive the work of an intelligence. We see that somebody's done things when we see a purposeful arrangement of parts, like in a dumb mousetrap. You look at a mousetrap. If you saw a mousetrap for the first time, you'd know it was intentionally made, because you'd see how the parts matched up against each other. They can do something now, and that's the hallmark of a mind, because only minds can have purposes. Nothing else in the world has a purpose except something with a mind. And since we see all of these purposeful arrangements, all these purposeful structures in life, as I said, everybody thought that life, based on that physical evidence, thought that life was purposely made. Then along comes Darwin, offers this hypothesis, which was at the time laughed at by serious scientists, but then over time kind of sunk in and became orthodoxy. And in the 150 plus years since his idea was published, we still have absolutely no evidence that living things can give rise to substantially different forms based on random changes and natural selection. Even as I explain in my later books, especially my book in the year 2019, which is called Darwin Devolves, we see that random changes can affect life, and sometimes they help it. But overwhelmingly, helpful mutations are ones that degrade pre-existing genes. And sometimes that helps. Sometimes it helps. But a lot of the examples that evolutionists generally point to, including things like, say, dog breeds, like French poodles and bulldogs and stuff, modern science has been able to sequence the complete DNA of these guys and much else besides, and has shown that, in fact, what gives them their characteristic changes, the curly hair, the shortened snout, short legs thing, are broken genes or broken control regions next to genes. There's nothing that indicates that a random process can build new complex systems.
Let me ask you this question.
Real quick, Chris, I'm sorry. Is it related, or are you changing the subject?
It's related.
Okay. Go ahead. I just said one question before we moved on.
If you believe, and I'm with you, that the science, you gave a retort and said we're not basing our position on faith, we're basing it on the science. And if we have the science on our side, then why is it that even as we're looking at your Wikipedia page, you are so generously referred to as a pseudo scientist by whoever it is that's written your page here. You're not doing real science over there. Mm-hmm. So if you believe and if we do have the science on our side, how is it so pervasive that the kind of false explanation is the leading worldview? How has Darwinism taken such a hold on the scientific community to the point where it's just accepted? It sounds almost like some kind of conspiracy or something. How do you get what I as you might be able to speak to this, but I believe it's the general majority of scientists are going to affirm Darwinistic evolution. So what is your explanation for how so many people could either be purposefully overlooking this or not interpreting the data correctly, or what would you say? Because anytime you offer a position like yours, the retort that I almost always get from people is, well, 99.9% of all scientists believe in Darwinian evolution. So what do you say to something like that?
Well, you can say a number of things, and it's hard to summarize it, but I go into it in my books. But a couple of things are this, that Darwin's theory, when it was first proposed, was really kind of laughed at. And for decades, it was thought to be utterly inadequate. But scientists kind of got used to the idea that, hey, maybe science can explain life. We don't need no pastors. We don't need no religious folks to tell us how life arose. And so the general idea that life developed through natural processes, that kind of took root, not based on any evidence that any natural process could actually account for life, but just because we scientists, we study natural processes. So therefore, life must have arisen by a natural process. And then kind of in the middle of the 20th century, some folks, the new genetic view of biology kind of took hold. Most folks know about the work of the monk Gregor Mendel, who showed that, white peas and green peas or wrinkled peas and stuff, those traits could be inherited, and essentially started the science of genetics. And this science of genetics was combined with a little bit of math, and people were able to use math to kind of follow how genes could pass from one generation to another. And then they'd said, well, suppose there was a gene that gave a little bit of advantage. Let's run the numbers and say if it helped the organism 1%, how long would it take for that gene to spread through a population? And they would, do some calculations and say, hey, this could happen. But they didn't know what the gene was, and they didn't have any idea of the molecular basis of life, even then, back in the middle of the 20th century, before, say, 1950. But nonetheless, this idea that we've got math on our side, and we all know that science can explain stuff, and heck, we can interpret this math and natural selection in terms of Darwin's theory. So something called NeoDarwinism, which was Darwin's theory plus genetics plus math, kind of got accepted as the default view, and by intellectual inertia, it's continued to be the accepted view. And it has been the accepted view, even though it was first invented before we knew that DNA was the genetic material, before we knew that proteins made molecular machines, before any of this stuff. And through all sorts of surprises in the laboratory, all sorts of things that nobody knew about, all sorts of complications and sophistication and stuff, this simple idea of, well, maybe if things improve in small steps, that is the only justification that has been used to to justify the idea. But essentially that was taught, from professor to graduate student, through the generations, and it's orthodoxy. All your friends believe it. That's what your professors teach you, so that's what you believe is true too.
Yeah,
so
it's
confirmation
kind of like,
bias and indoctrination.
Yeah, why are there no conservatives graduating from journalism school? Well, because they're not allowed to graduate. That's why. It's I cannot help in looking at, this conversation mainly about science and discovery and the industry that surrounds it and supports that, which I think we can all agree, just for the sort of wellness of human life, or at least the quality of life that we get to enjoy. We have a lot to thank the scientific community for. But again, looking at Darwinism or evolution or whatever, we got to, I can't help but look at it in a broader context of so many societal industries. It's not just about science, but it is also about politics, and it is also about social issues. It is also because, again, especially recent events have taught us all that it doesn't really matter what is factually correct, as long as you are speaking the right shibboleths, you are playing a part in the correct narrative that says you're a good guy or you're wrong or you're right or whatever. So I think it's fascinating, especially in the scientific industry, where they will be so happy to say something is absolutely true because science proves it, and the peer-reviewed studies have shown, and the this and the that and the that, and then something comes along, proves it wrong, and the scientific community gets to say, yeah, well, that's science. We change when we want. It seems like they get to change when it's convenient, but the rest of us kind of, we just have to stick with whatever the narrative is. I think some interesting examples in this, just to bring some attention to some more parts of your Wikipedia page, some things that I did not know about you, and I'm wondering if the listeners did as well, is that you served as expert witness in some court cases regarding, First Amendment rights to teach intelligent design in schools. And the way that this Wikipedia person describes this court case is as if they are getting paid to write an episode of Law and Order or something. I mean, it is dramatic. Just if I may just give a quick example. Let's see here. Some of the most crucial exchanges in the trial occurred during Behe's cross-examination, where his testimony would prove devastating to the defense. Behe was forced to concede that, quote, this is the quote, there are no peer-reviewed articles by anyone advocating or for intelligent design supported by pertinent experiments or calculations which provide detailed, rigorous accounts of how intelligent design of any biological system occurred. Now, when I read that, what I hear is similar to why there are no conservatives graduating from journalism school. it is, why are there no intelligent design peer reviews, experiments or papers? Well, because the system is built in a way that there's no possible world in which the sort of the orthodox scientistic temple, the priests of the temple, would allow such heresy to even pass through the doors of the peer review system. The system is built to keep, dissenters out. Right. And then additionally, it goes on. Oh, where did it go? I don't want to lose it because it was along the same lines. Oh, it's talking about, Behe was forced to agree that the number of prokaryotes in 1 ton of soil are 7 orders of magnitude higher than the population it would take to produce the disulfide bond, and that it's
here.
No, listen to this. Here's the key. It's entirely possible. So this is the devastating defeat of Mr. Behe is right. When you said the extraordinarily scientifically honest and intellectually honest sentence. It's entirely possible that something that couldn't be produced in a lab in 2 years could be produced over 3.5 billion years, which, look, that is a very intellectually and scientifically honest thing to say. So someone would have to be, honest, just being dishonest to say that it's impossible that something that didn't happen in 2 years couldn't happen in 3.5 billion years, partially because 3.5 billion years is such an absurdly large number that like the human brain can't even conceive of exactly what 3.5 billion even looks like of anything. And so, it's not about you being correct or incorrect. It's not about intelligent design being correct or incorrect. That's, it's not about Darwin being correct or incorrect in this particular instance. It's about your being intellectually honest, and they are not. I mean, they're simply displaying themselves as a sort of brutally orthodox, oppressive, ideological order of militants or something that they just cannot budge. I don't know, man. It's really crazy reading this stuff.
I think that's Wikipedia through and through, and not just on intelligent design. Not just on intelligent, but certainly on intelligent design. Yeah. Let me just tell listeners that if you want to hear a different slant on the trial that I was involved in, it's called the Dover trial or the Kitzmiller trial way back in 2005. I've written about it in my books, in Darwin Devolves, and another more recent book called A Mousetrap for Darwin, in which I answer critics. But let me just mention one pertinent thing. You get all sorts of speculations. People will say, well, if things improve 1% each year, then we'll have magnificent creatures in just 100 years from now. But what science has to do is experiments. You can calculate all sorts of things, or you can imagine all sorts of things. And there's in my book 2019 Darwin Devolves, I talk about experiments at Michigan State University by a man there named Richard Lenski, who's a professor of microbiology, and he grew bacteria. He has grown bacteria in his lab since 1990. And it turns out that bacteria have very short lifespans, about 6 hours or so, and so they can go through six-ish or so generations per day. And over the course of 3 decades, the bugs in the flasks in his lab have gone through about 70,000 generations. And there have been trillions of these guys born and died in the flasks in Richard Lenski's lab. And he has seen that they evolved, that they changed, that some of them grew faster, some of them increased in size, some of them had a different shape, and so on. And over time, he couldn't do it right away because the technology wasn't available. But over time, he was able to track down exactly which molecular changes in DNA, which mutations occurred that allowed them to outcompete the original parent strain. And in the year 2015, he published a paper which detailed about 40 genes that had changed, which helped the bugs grow faster and better. So the 40 best mutations. And of those 40 mutations, 40 of them either broke or degraded the genes in which they occurred. So here we have, the best experimental evidence we know of what Darwin's mechanism does, and it does adapt creatures to their environments. These things did do better in the laboratory environment in which they grew, but they all improved by breaking stuff. And Darwin's mechanism of random changes is just great at breaking stuff. The interesting thing is that sometimes when you break stuff in certain circumstances, that can help. And I don't have time to go into it.
Sure.
But all of these speculations in Wikipedia and other places about how swell things would go if we just had more time or bigger population sizes, they're pretty much just hot air. And the experiments that this fellow Richard Lenski and a bunch of other folks have done are much more reliable, and they show that, in fact, evolution is mostly devolution, not evolution. It works by degrading stuff.
Yeah, I mean, that's just the sort of the direction the universe moves in is entropy,
certainly
right?
My part of it, yeah.
That's the natural movement of things, is for things to become more chaotic, not to assemble so perfectly as to create a consciousness or something. Yeah, wow, what an interesting fellow you are, buddy.
Yeah, well, it's a fascinating topic, and I'm surprised not more people are involved in this area.
I'm wondering if you could let us know, and you might be intentionally vague about your faith or spirituality or whatever, just to keep it out of the discussion, because you are a scientist and you try to approach things from that perspective first. And you seem to be the kind of person who's saying, I'm coming to this as objectively as I possibly can, and finding that the evidence here supports a religious worldview. But I don't know that I've ever actually heard you say specifically where you're at in your spiritual journey or your faith. Would you mind giving us a peek into that?
Sure, yeah. Well, I do so whenever I'm asked. And actually, in my books, I've stated that I am a Christian. I'm a Roman Catholic. I was born into a Catholic family. And actually, I was taught Darwin's theory in parochial schools, and I never had any problem with it. It's only later on, when I was a professor of biochemistry, that I became skeptical of it for scientific reasons, not for religious reasons. And you're right. In my books, I want, as a Christian, I'm, there's a zillion other folks who know more or lead better lives or all sorts of things who could speak to that aspect of things. I got a PhD in biochemistry, so I like to keep close to what I know best, and people read my books because I focus on the science. And the most, I think the most astounding thing of the past 100 years is the fact that the more science knows about life and the universe at large, about how well our planet is formed to support life, and how the laws of nature are necessary for life, and all of this stuff wasn't known 100 years or so ago, and yet the impression is given in mass media and TV programs and stuff that science, the progress of science, is opposing a religious point of view, whereas it's the exact opposite. The more we know, the more science knows, the more it points to the need for something beyond the universe to explain what we find within the universe. So I'm a Christian, just a run-of-the-mill Christian. But that has not affected my take on the evidence for evolution. I would have been happy to be, say, something like a theistic evolutionist of the stripe of, say, Francis Collins or something like that, but the evidence does not support that. So it's the biochemistry that I focus on. It's the biochemistry that kind of drives me to write all of this stuff, because pretty much I think people are being led down a garden path where the evidence for everybody to see points strongly in the opposite direction from what most people are being told.
Yeah.
I think it's fascinating that, especially recently, and this has been lingering for some time, but it's more available in the mainstream, and there's more outspoken, high-profile figures talking about this, and that is a sort of version of intelligent design, but not by a supernatural creator, by an extraterrestrial creator. You've got the sort of Elon Musks of the world, and these types who are sure they will sort of tout some sort of mixture of intelligent design and evolution, or guided evolution or something. But it is this sort of version where it's the aliens designed us and seeded us on Earth, and they're coming back, baby. I find it's the fact that that's such a mainstream idea now is a really sort of unique place in history, or am I just too young to know any better?
Well, it's a strange world we live in, but hey, way back in the 1970s, Francis Crick, most people have heard of Francis Crick, he of the DNA fame. He wrote a paper called Directed Panspermia,
yes,
which was, in fact, I think the first one to suggest this idea that, maybe space aliens sent a rocket ship to Earth to seed it with life. So this idea has been around for a while, but it was kind of laughed out of court a long time ago. But same ideas are recycled time and time again, because nobody can think of anything better, and they don't want to admit the obvious, that we were in fact designed by somebody who knew what he was doing, somebody who had the power to do so, and of course has obvious religious implications.
It's so really only the moral and ethical implications at the core of the extraterrestrial intelligent design or the supernatural intelligent design.
Well, sure. When we talk about where we came from and what we're made for, that's going to obviously impact what we think is right to do, what we think is not right to do. But it's so a lot of people are afraid that if you take that first step and you admit the obvious, that maybe the eye did not arise through accident, then they are on a slippery slope down to where they're going to have to worry about,
accountability.
things that they're doing themselves.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering if you would have any. I know we're getting kind of close to the end of our time here with you, but particularly, so we had Basil shared a personal story about situation he was in. My wife, as I've said, she teaches at a charter school, which is public school, but she's close with the superintendents of the school, so she knows she's in friendly company there, but she still is bound to the curriculum, and she always laments when she has to teach evolutionary theory. I'm wondering, as somebody who's been in this discussion for so long and has been around it in academics, do you have any kind of words of encouragement or any kind of strategies for either students or teachers who are out there who are dealing with this sort of stuff day in, day out, as to how they might be able to take something, a position like you're espousing for intelligent design and work that into a curriculum, or to be able to speak about it? Or what's a good approach for teachers or students when they're faced with this in a classroom setting?
Well, I think for public schools, intelligent design is just too much, that people freak out. And it's a big country. There's lots of folks with different opinions, and if you talk about intelligent design directly, that it upsets so many people that it gets to be counterproductive. But one thing that I think teachers can do, and that nobody will be able to, at least honestly, object to, is to talk about the discussion in the scientific community about whether or not we have the full story about evolution. It's probably surprising to many people, but I would estimate that at least a third, maybe up to half of professional biologists don't think Darwin's theory can explain everything that we've discovered about life. And folks are kind of casting around for some alternative theory. There are things called niche construction and a bunch of different alternatives, metagenomics and symbiosis theory and complexity theory and self-engineering, and these are all put forward by folks who are skeptical that Darwin's theory is true. They don't subscribe to intelligent design, but I think just exposing kids to the intellectual ferment in the field will show them that these are open questions. And I think that can inoculate somebody against the idea that we have all the answers right now. And there are plenty of papers in the scientific literature, or even semi-popular ones, that essentially say we have no clue about the origin of life. And these would be, I think, an effective counter to textbooks which just kind of parrot the orthodoxy, which again, most scientists know to be false. Most scientists know we don't have an explanation for the origin of life, even though textbooks say that we do. So I think a high school teacher who just picks out one or two or three alternative views would go a long way towards showing her class that we don't have all the answers, that there are huge questions still unanswered. And I think that's probably the best you can do at this point in our country on the topic of evolution and how we got here.
Yeah,
Yes,
thank
well,
you.
the problem with that is that it would then be teaching the students how to think and not what to think. And we
Yeah, that
can't
is a
have
problem.
that. We can't have that. You know, you've been so generous with your time, and I don't want to keep you any longer than you have available for us. But I did have one last question.
Uh-huh.
How are you doing, Chris? Do you have anything else? I don't want to
No,
take.
no, go ahead.
Okay. All right. So, I kind of got into this when we were having some discussions about apologetics, specifically of the Christian faith. And to a degree, I think somebody could find a way to, at least rhetorically, compare the study of or the insistence on intelligent design as a type of apologetics. But man, just people are living their lives. They're living their lives. Russia, Ukraine, inflation, gas prices. Life is hard. We got so many things to worry about, man. We got so many things to think about. We got kids. We got grandparents. We got all sorts of things going on in our lives. Why should any individual, whether they be a parent of a child in school, whether they be a kid in high school, or just someone, waking up every morning, going to pay the bills, what is the danger of not having intelligent design advocated in public, or is there one? I mean, it's a privileged position for me, primarily because I didn't even have to go to school to be able to sit here and have this conversation. I mean, I had to go to high school, of course, because I needed to rack up an experience about, getting flogged in front of my classmates for questioning Darwinian evolution. But you guys, you actually had to work pretty hard. You got papers, man. I don't have papers. So being the primarily privileged person here, to sit and think and read and ask questions and think more and think bigger and explore different possibilities. But not everybody gets that sort of room, that breathing room in their life. Is there something that is, existentially dreadful about someone who just kind of says, whatever, evolution, I don't really care, or whatever. Whatever the scientists say, I'll go with that. Or is there a depth dimension to it? Maybe it's not an existential threat, but it's, the depth of understanding, the depth of experience of life, the depth of observation of beauty and creation and things like that. A broader possibility of experiencing life, in the expanse of intelligent design. I'm now reaching my ramble limit, but I'm hoping that maybe this has inspired something for you to come back at me with.
Okay. Well, let me see if I can get a handle on it. So I think the question is, well, what practical benefit is this? Everybody has to make a living and so on. So why should we bother with it? And
so concise. So concise.
Everybody does.
This is why you're the scientist.
Everybody does have to make a living, and we're all pressed for time and have obligations and stuff. But every now and again, you ask yourself, why am I doing this? What am I living for? We could live, just a brute existence and just survive and, gather nuts and berries and stuff and live day to day. But humans, people, we're rational creatures, and of course, as Christians, we know that we have souls and we have purposes. And so to live a fully human life, you need to understand, where you're coming from, where you're going to. And unfortunately, that in years past or in ages past, people knew that, first of all, from seeing that that life was made. They could see the purpose in life, and their societies would reinforce and tell them that they had a purpose, that they were not just atoms in a randomly moving void. But unfortunately, in our age, as technologically advanced as we are, the take-home message is exactly that you are, essentially an accident. You are a purposeless result of just random processes working over time. And if one takes that to heart, it degrades your dignity as a human being. It degrades the dignity of your family, your parents, your children, and so on. It degrades your view of society as a whole. So while I agree that intelligent design is not the same thing as breathing or finding food to eat, nonetheless, I think it, or something very close to it, is necessary for a fully human life, where you realize not only your own dignity, but the dignity of your fellow human beings.
I love that. I would hate to lambast the insistence of orthodoxy on the scientific community and then have to rely on orthodoxy to provide value to what you're arguing for. And I think that was beautiful. So thank you for your answer.
Good.
Yep. It's
okay.
It's been really good having you on. I know that you had said, as we were talking before, that you'd be open to coming back and doing this again sometime. So we're definitely going to keep you in the Rolodex here. And I've just been so blessed by this conversation and your time. And I thank you for the work that you've been doing. I said it, to kind of start the show here, but really the work that you have done made its way in front of my eyes at a really critical time in my life. And it really was something that was encouraging. It was refreshing. It gave me a sense, like you even just explained, of purpose, and really kind of pushed me over a little hill that I was in my life. So I just want to give you that personal word of encouragement. And I know that there are so many others who could share the same sort of story. So I want to say thank you for not only just your time here tonight, but the work that you have done. Keep it up, because I can't imagine how many people you're blessing and how many lives you're changing with the work that you're doing.
Gee whiz, you make me blush. Just don't let the editor at Wikipedia hear about this.
I was gonna say, do you have that guy's number? Because I noticed I'm not showing up in any entries. I gotta see what that guy will do. Well, thank you very much, Michael Behe, for your time and your gracious answers and patience with my rambling. And like Chris said, we would love to have you back again sometime soon.
Sure. Thanks for having me. I'll come back anytime.
Do you have anything you would like to pitch? Where can people learn more about your work? Can they buy your book? Can they follow you on Twitter?
Sure. Yeah, you can just look up my books on Amazon. Just type in my name, and I've got a couple there. I would start with Darwins Black Box, if you don't know anything about the field. Also, there's a website called michaelbehe.com that some folks set up for me. I don't know how to do that. And there's a bunch of short videos there, which have been put together to explain ID in a kind of friendly and fun fashion for folks who don't know much about it.
There you go, folks. You have all the info you could possibly want. You have the knowledge on how to gain more knowledge. Pursue that. Follow it. Follow your heart. Once again, thank you very much, Michael Behe. And thank you. Thank you to everyone out there, out in podcast land, for listening to this episode of Ravel. You know, we'll be back next week, so make sure to tune in. But before then, Dr. Chris, do you have any last words?
Godspeed.
Thanks for listening to Ravel. To learn more about who we are, what we believe, or how to support this ministry, visit our website at ravelpodcast.com. If you have a question you would like answered on the show, or to let us know how we're doing, email us at contact@ravelpodcast.com. This project is made possible by the prayers and generosity of listeners just like you.
Yes, we're recording on Skype.
I don't see it. Oh, there it says it.
It's at the top.
Sorry.
It's okay. That was a weird start for me anyways.
Good.
Oh, it's because I didn't put any chapstick on.
Oh my gosh, you are a freak.